last meeting of the year, so welcome everybody. We'll move on to our agenda, starting with item 1, which is any apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Brian Davis. Any other apologies, Rachel?
No, none received, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. Item 2 on our agenda is disclosures of interest. So this is to receive any disclosures of interest by members relating to items to be considered at this meeting. So members of the committee, any disclosures?
No.
Lovely. We'll take silence and shaking of heads. So thank you very much. No disclosures. Item 3 is declaration of party whips. And this is to receive disclosures of prohibited party whips, which a member has been given in relation to the meeting in accordance with section 78(3) of the Local Government Measure 2011. Do we have any declarations of party whips? Okay, and again, we'll take silence to be none. So thank you very much, committee. Item 4 on our agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting from, when were they from? The 30th of, if I just go on them. Yeah, 30th of October, 2023. So I'm hoping you've had a chance to read through them. Does anybody have any comments or changes they would like to make? No, we're all happy with those. We did have one action on the bottom of those minutes, and I think it was quite an important one, that we were asking that there be more detail of the progression towards targets, and that has been accepted by HCR in their Mobility and Transport Climate Action Plan, and they're going to update their plans accordingly. Okay, so do I have anybody to propose and second those minutes, please? So Councillor Glynn, thank you very much. And to second.
I'll second the manager, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor Adrian. Okay, so the next item on our agenda, item 5, is the Strategic Risk Register. Obviously, there's quite a big register there, and there are lots of items on it. But for this committee, we go to page 17, I think is the first item for us to review. And I'm just scrolling down now in my minutes. That's right. So who is here, officers, that would like to take us through this one? I think, Bets, were you going to take us through the register?
Yes, unless Councillor David's here today. No Councillor David. Yeah, I'm happy to.
I am here, Bets, but I'll leave you go through the details. I was just going to give a high-level overview, but I don't think that's necessary because that would have been appropriate for the whole register. But perhaps if you just look at the risks that are relevant to this particular committee.
Okay, so I'll kick off. So yeah, I'm assuming, like I say, you've all received the reports. So this report is going to all of the scrutiny committees. And it's the reason you have all of the risks is it's quite difficult with some of them to just pick them out for an individual committee because they're so cross-cutting, but there are some very obvious ones that would go to individual committees. So your role here today is, well, I'll just go to remind you of the key scrutiny questions. So these are, the committee should focus on the scoring profiles based on the guidance given in the risk management framework. Do you agree? Are they fair, appropriate judgment of the risk's likelihood and impact? Mitigation. Are the controls, mitigating actions robust enough for getting the residual score down or confident to close the risk? And finally, progress made against managing the risk. Does the commentary provided give confidence that the risk is being managed effectively? So the overall risk report that goes to Cabinet, just very quickly, I'd say in that at end of Q2, there were 15 risks on the strategic risk register, and all owners have been asked to provide a progress since last quarter. the detail of all those risks can be found in Appendix A, and then we also have Appendix B, which is a visual presentation of the risks in a heat map. So on that, we can see that 5 out of the 14 risks have a probability of likely and impact of major. 1 has a probability almost certain and impact of major, and 1 has a probability of likely and impact of severe. So finally, before we look at the appendices, during Q2, the following risks have changed their probability of impact. So we've got PROC000, which is scores moved down to a 6. 008, scores moved down to a 3. HTR0018, the score's gone up 6. And ASC0064, the score's gone up to a 20. We're also asking in this report that executive management's team would like to de-escalate the risk, which has got the reference PCC008, which is all about the planned power outages. So that's the cover report done. So we've now got the appendices A and B, which I'm not going to go through verbatim with yourselves now today. I would now hand it back to yourself, Chair, to open the floor for any questions.
Lovely, Bets. Thank you for that overview. So, committee, in your hands. Any questions? Okay, we're all quiet there. So, oh, sorry, Councillor Gary, kicking us off.
Thanks, Chair. Go on, I'll start the ball rolling. I think perhaps a general question to Bets and David, perhaps, really, but looking at the reports that we've given, obviously, and we're seeing the strategic ones, we clock that, but pretty much all of these are in that sort of quite frustratingly purple pink colour that we've moaned about a few times. But what we haven't seen from the last time we saw these is any great reduction in any, and there's a huge amount of actions that say action in progress, but I guess we just, I'm sorry, not speaking for the committee here, but feel that we're struggling to work out what the action is. If these risks are still there and they're pretty much the same scores, or some have gone up, arguably 1 or 2 have gone down, and 1 gone up significantly, even with the inherent risks sort of addressed. I guess the question for me is, how do we sort of press officers and those taking on board these risks that the action that they're doing is enough? So it's all well and good saying I'll send an email to somebody to work out what's happening, but if there's no reply in 3 months and it just stays there as an action, I guess, yeah, I'm struggling to see what the action we're doing about them and how that's, I would argue, should be creating a reduction, not really an increase. And I don't know if that's a general trend across the rest of the risks, because we're not seeing them all here. But yeah, I guess just a frustration that we're not seeing much progress, certainly not in a downward trend. And whether you've got any comment on that or not, and I realise that you're not owning these risks, you're just presenting them to us.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Gary. And you have nicely ended that to help me out, as in, yes, obviously my role isn't, I'm not the owner of these risks, so I can't answer that question in the detail that you probably would like. All I could say is, in part of the risk management framework, not framework, policy and guidance, now we've renamed it, the whole process has got 6 stages. And, one of the stages is the controls, which most people refer to as mitigation. So you can see in Appendix A where it's got the final column of control or action. So that's telling you what the services or the owner of the risks are doing to manage that risk, to take it down. And behind the scenes, that owner will be reporting progress against each of those individual mitigations to say what the progress is in terms of getting the overall risk score down. But I can't answer in any more detail today unless there was a specific risk you wanted to look at and that named owner was here today, or director, and it was able to answer it further.
Yeah, probably not specific ones, Bets. Thank you. I think I get a bit frustrated, like I'm sure many do, that emails sent to Welsh Government or looking at other guidance documents and things like that, but it's not creating action. They might have done an action, but it's not creating change. So I guess, yeah, we as a whole team just have to work out how we try and get that change that we need to see through some of these strategic risks, rather than there's no point doing actions if they're not going to mitigate against the risk. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see both Jane and David have got their hands up. I think, Jane, you had your hand up first, so if you'd like to come in there.
Thank you, Councillor Angela. Yeah, I think Betsy has sort of set the theme really in terms of the role here, but I really think that in terms of committee, this is your chance there now to challenge the owners of these risks around those actions. You know, you as a committee can ask for that additional information to be given you here today. You know, anybody that's managing and got these controls in place should be able to tell you a little bit more detail should you wish. So I think that's absolutely in the committee's role to now challenge and ask those questions as appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Jane. And David?
Thank you, Chair. I was simply going to say that but by the nature of some of these strategic risks, they're going to be on the register for quite some time. And the mitigation in many cases, it's just to ensure that we don't suffer the full impact or potential impact of some of these risks. So just to take some examples, cyber attack. I think as long as we're using, you know, high tech and digital sort of methods, but we were always going to be prone to cyber attack. It's just a question of taking actions to ensure that we do our damnedest, you know, to avoid such an attack, and that is what's happening. And then in other cases, there's just a level of due diligence required around potential risk that exists.
Oh, we're getting, David Selby, I think we're getting some background noise from you. Thank you. Sorry, David.
Yeah, so it's just to make the point really that I fully accept, you know, what Councillor Gary's saying, but by their very nature, some risks are going to take longer than others to actually mitigate and disappear from the register, and others, you know, they might be there for an incredibly long time because of the very nature of the risk itself. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Councillor Adrian, you got your hand up. Sorry, Adrian, you're on mute at the moment.
Yes, I'm just agreeing with what Councillor David just said. You know, that's the whole point. There's always risk. It doesn't go away. We are taking action. But just one thing I'd like to ask is when an action is withdrawn, what does that actually mean? There's a couple, well, quite a few on the finance one, I think on the GDPR. So could I have an explanation of what withdrawn actually means? Is it not relevant anymore, or is it fully completed?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah, please, Bets.
It's there's also the option, Councillor Adrian, action completed. So if an action is completed, obviously it would have action completed. So action withdrawn is very much is when an action has, for lack of another word, they have decided that to no longer continue with that action to control the mitigating risk. There can be a little bit of a mix-up that officers are putting withdrawn when the action's actually been completed. And that's something, you know, constantly we're trying to work with to get them more familiar with the risk management. But in general, it is when an action they've decided to no longer continue with that particular action.
Right. So it's either not relevant anymore or they've done it. It's one or the other.
Yeah, but if they've done it, it should be action complete.
Yeah, that's what I understand. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, you've explained that, but the issue there is if different officers are using the different terms, we don't know. So just for example, under the finance FIN 0001, there's an item that says income generation withdrawn. So is that withdrawn, finished, or, you know, we don't actually know then, do we, from this, which it is, whether that action is finished. I think the point Adrian's making that this doesn't tell us then if we're not using the same terminology throughout the paper.
Yes, I completely understand. And, you know, that might not, what I just suggested it might, you know, is a minority, because obviously we have hundreds of risk in the risk register. So I don't have sight of of them all. I just don't have the time or capacity. So I'm just saying, I know as a minority, when I am going through, when I attend SLT and we review risk registers, that occasionally I do pick up and that, oh, actually, well, that's not withdrawn. That's actually something that's been complete. So that is the terminology. And we're doing lots and lots of work to get all of the services to be using the right terms and managing the risks correctly. But I was just offering up that as a suggestion, you know, that sometimes there can be that slight, and perhaps I've skewed the answer by suggesting that, Councillor Angela. But you've chosen a perfect one there because it's finance. So hopefully Jane will be able to answer.
I can see Jane has got her hand up, Beth.
Yeah.
So shall we go to Jane now?
I'm going to stop talking and hand you over to Jane.
Thank you, Beth. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, those items that have been withdrawn were work streams that we were progressing with at a point in time. We hadn't necessarily completed all of that work, but they've been subsumed into other work streams. So you'll all recall that sustainable powers is now very much a work stream that we're delivering on. We did have a specific group looking at income generation. That's now been something that services look at individually through their integrated business plans and through the budget process. So that's why some of those elements have been withdrawn. We're no longer following things through that route, but they've morphed, if you like, into something else.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Carl.
Thank you, Chair. I find it a little bit worrying that, you know, we have risk registers that are not accurate by people with some officers, as we heard, putting down that they're withdrawing activity when in actual fact they're complete and vice versa. I find that very, very worrying because obviously resources not being used where it should be. Is there anyone actually overlooking any of these?
Jane, again, got your
Can I
hand
come
up.
back in? I mean, from that financial perspective, then absolutely. I oversee this. I'm the owner of that particular risk. And as you'll all be aware, there is a lot of work going on in terms of balancing the budget, looking forward, looking to see how we deliver a council at a much lower cost. So those specific work streams were things we were doing in the past, but we are not doing those now, hence they're withdrawn. But they were actions that were being used against this risk at a point in time, hence they still show here. But I'm sure, you know, from what you've seen as a councillor through some of the budget seminars and so on, there is an awful lot of work going on at the moment that replaces some of those specific work streams to actually deal with this risk in terms of the financial sustainability of the budget. So I can give you the assurance that yes, I am very much overseeing that.
Do you oversee every department, Jane, or do you just oversee particular departments? Do you oversee the whole lot, or does the directors under the certain disciplines report to you and you check their work, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, the directors are responsible and their heads of service and every budget manager in the council for that matter in terms of that financial piece. But my responsibility as the 151 officer is to be to get assurance myself that the council is doing everything that it should do to keep us financially safe, that we're managing our resources well and so on. So that's a particular role in terms of the 151 officer as well.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. Councillor David.
Yeah, just to add to that, Chair, that a work stream might be withdrawn because there's a better way to deliver something, and they might actually replace it with a more effective work stream. And I think this is something that I've been actually talking about when we refer to sustainable powers, that we need to be in a process which is perpetual change, because I think the world is changing so quickly and new digital methods, etc., are becoming available to us, that it's highly probable that a particular work stream might be replaced with something that'll prove to be far more effective. So I can't speak for every individual service, but I think that's just something to bear in mind, that it doesn't actually mean to say that the work stream is unfinished and pushed to one side, but it might mean that it's redundant in its current form and being replaced with something more effective. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I guess we've got to bear in mind that in a way, these are retrospective. We're looking at this is just a point in time, isn't it? This is where we are now. but you know, this, I'm assuming this is a working document, it's continually updated. But I'm just curious how you score each item. So we have the heat map, that's quite obvious, although I feel strongly that the pink should be where the red is and the red should be, my head can't accept that pink is worse than red, but that's neither here. But the scoring, and I've read the risk management policy and guidance document. It's, you know, 45 pages there, but how do you score? Where do the numbers come from, and how can you be sure that they're accurate?
Shall I take this one, Jane, or do you want to?
Go on, Bet, you can pick this one.
Okay, so yeah, Councillor Ange, so I'm glad you've read the risk management policy and guidance, because that's where I would be referring you to. So how it's scored is we have the matrix, which has got like a very crudely, we say 1 to 5 on probability and 1 to 5 on impact. So when a risk is then, they've just, you know, the owner, and with, you know, discussion within the team, with the head of service, moderation, with the director, the performance review meetings. So it's not it's done once and then that is it. So that discussion would take place, and they will decide what they think the probability is and what they think the impact is going to be. So depending upon that, which to say it was a 2 and the other one was a 3, it's very crudely then just 2 times 3, which comes up with obviously a score of 6. So when they actually input that into the JCAD piece of software, the software does that for them. So
Okay.
that's where that matrix towards the bottom of the policy and guidance kind of sets out very clearly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, and then shows the, and then to support that, to make sure that, you know, we've got this moderation, is that further detail below the matrix, which says, you know, if you're within this organizational category, we would suggest under impact 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, severe to lower impact. This is what we are expecting the impact to be within the, and that is a guide, Councillor Ange, you know, to try to help moderate across the authority.
Well, lovely. I mean, I think that one word there summed it up for me and gave me some reassurance that you're moderating, because having said earlier that perhaps some officers are not using the same language, the fact that if you're coming together and moderating those scores, you've got a better idea of making sure that officers are scoring to a similar thought process, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could I just add to that, Councillor Ange? I feel really bad on saying that. I just really like to emphasise when I say terminology.
No, honestly, we won't hold it against you. Don't worry.
It is rare, but I just suggest that as an alternative. You know, the majority are using withdrawn and complete 100% correctly. We just have the odd, a new officer starting or whatever, and just on the odd occasion, and that's just the same with most things. So it is quite rare for them to be using the wrong terminology.
Okay, but I mean, naturally, an individual will have different levels of attitude towards risk. So what I might consider as a 10, you might think is a 5, for example. So the fact that you're moderating, I feel, is a positive move. Anyway, thank you. Councillor Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps that would explain my one query. On the one on GTBR, it's still 12 red. And I note on all the actions, everything's completed. There's just 2 actions in progress. It just seems to be that everything's been either withdrawn or completed, etc., etc. So but it stayed at 12 red. So does that mean that it's always going to be there because it is a risk and it's that high level risk? Or is there other actions that need to be done? Because, like I say, there's only 2 actions in progress according to the list. Do you get my question?
Councillor Adrian, could you just say what was the reference again, please?
It's the GDBR one. Like, oh, sorry, I haven't got the number. It's
GDBR.
PR.
Yeah.
The risk on that. You know,
I think it's here, ICT 0010 for data protection.
Ah, right. Okay.
Right?
Thank you. The data protection.
Yeah.
That is, I don't know whether one of the officers, like the actual owner, Helen Dolman or Ellen, as head of services here can answer your questions specifically, Councillor Adrian. I would just say reiterate what Jane said. It's within your gift as this committee to delve in further and to ask that service if you would like some further information as to why there are only 2 mitigating actions, and also asking for assurance regarding those 2 mitigating actions.
Okay, then we probably will, because it just seems odd to me that it's staying static at that score, and yet a lot of actions have been done and completed. So can we note that, Chair?
Yep, we can ask those questions, of course.
Thank you.
Yes, that's our role. Very much so, yeah. Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think obviously get the point that we're seeing a sort of the overall strategic risk register. Not all of them are relevant to our area of service, if you like, so I won't delve into them. But I wondered, Bets, if the picture that we're seeing is a general trend across the organisation, whether you can tell us that. So in the main, in what we're seeing, of this summary, relatively static movement, 1 or 2 gone up a little bit, 1 or 2 gone down a bit, but the bulk of them have stayed pretty much static. Is that what you see across the board?
I would, like I said earlier, you know, there's a lot of risks in the authority, but I go round SLTs on a quarterly basis. So I would say at this point in time, no, that's not the case. Councillor David answered very eloquently earlier, explaining, you know, when we're looking at the strategic risks, we're looking at that high level of a risk that sometimes, you know, due to the nature of the risk, it's more likely at that strategic level, it's harder to bring them down. But that's not fair. Like as Councillor Andrews referred to as moderation, you know, each risk is so different. But no, that's not the case, Councillor Gary. You do see if you drill down and looked at service risk registers, programme risk registers, you would see that the risks are going up and down, and in majority cases going down in terms of the control and mitigation.
Okay, no, that's great. That's pleasing to hear, because I think it is that difference that we're seeing here of the level of these risks. Some of the challenges around them are almost completely out of our hands. I get that, but I was just concerned if that's a general trend across the organisation, then I'd be more concerned. But thank you.
Councillor Carl, thank you. You're on mute. Sorry, Councillor Carl.
Sorry, Chair. Just a comment from me, Chair, before I leave. I'm really pleased to hear the terminology owner of the data. That's really good, really encouraging going forward. I always push for that departments heads and directors in the past should be owning their own information and, you know, going into it in that point of view. So yeah, really encouraging to hear that. I have to leave now, Chair. So enjoy the rest of your meeting, everyone. Merry Christmas for those that I'm not going to see later on. Thanks.
Merry Christmas, Carl. Thank you for your contribution. Carl. Councillor David Thomas.
Yeah, just a brief comment on Councillor Adrian, I think, mentioned GDPR. I think that's a perfect example where risk will never be mitigated completely, simply because of the size of the organisation and the number of individuals are actually involved. I think it's more a case of ensuring that all training is completed, etc., and we can prove due diligence. But that is an example really where it's going to be very, very difficult to mitigate risk and wipe it out completely. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. And to be fair, Councillor David, I think you could say that about other items on this list. So the impact of the nature emergency is obviously a global issue, isn't it? Councillor Andy, we can hear you in the background. I don't know if you're aware your microphone is on. So, you know, there are a whole list there of potential consequences, and then it looks quite simple. There's just 2 actions in progress, but clearly delivering on our Section 6 duties and implementing the Nature Recovery Action Plan has got a whole load of work underneath those that are not listed in the register, isn't it? So for us to delve deeper, it would be when we have those items before scrutiny in their own right. Yeah, okay, I'm thinking out loud here, really, just making sure I understand this correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so anybody got any further questions here? Are you happy with how the register works? Do you feel the scorings are accurate and fair?
Yes.
Thank you, Liz. That was very definite.
Well, I mean, we did have quite a bit of discussion, I think, the other day, and I think that some of the points that we did raise, I think they've been clarified this morning by David and Bets and Jane.
Yeah,
you know, and
lovely.
I think the bits that you've added on, Angela, you know, that some of these risks are they're inherent, aren't they? They're going to be there indefinitely, and our job is to manage them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for us today, we were being asked that do we agree that the scoring profiles are based on the guidance given? And I think we've concluded we do, and that the mitigations that are in place are as good as they can be, given that David's told us we can't completely eliminate risk. That's just how it is, isn't it? And are we confident that progress is being made against managing those risks? Well, I suppose we'd have to go through each with a fine-tooth comb, but our
three.
Yeah. So everybody happy with that? No further questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Bets, for presenting that to us. And as I say, having that policy alongside this made it really helpful in looking at how the register has been set up and put together and how it's worked. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next item on our agenda then is item 6, homes in Powys, and I believe Matt and Richard are here, so I don't know who's going to take us through this.
Morning, Chair. Thanks very much. Yes, Richard Batt is going to lead the presentation on this. You've got the report in your agenda pack, but I'm happy to take questions at the end. I'm joined by Richard, who's our Senior Manager in Housing Communities, and Andy, the Head of Service.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Matthew. Thanks, Councillor Angela. I've produced a short PowerPoint presentation. There's just an introduction to the Homes in Powys Overview Report. If it's okay, Councillor Angela, I'll share my screen, just run through that presentation.
Please do, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, that's there. Thank you.
Okay, so as I said, just a brief sort of introduction to the report itself. Just by way of background to the report, the intention is to give a summary of how Homes in Powys works in practice and its impact on meeting housing need. In the report itself, it draws out what we mean by Homes in Powys. It's a combination of a common housing register shared between us and 8 partner community landlords. Back in the day, they used to be called housing associations. It enables a single point of access for applications by completing an online application, and then that application is considered by each and every of the partner community landlords, including ourselves. Also, there's a common allocation policy, and that covers the allocations for each partner community landlord. And an applicant would go into one of 5 priority bands, depending on the type, urgency of housing needs and the requirements. The allocation policy is framed by legislation, most notably Part 6 of the 1996 Housing Act. But we also have to give due consideration to homeless duties, and they are sort of contained within Part 2 of the 2014 Housing Wales Act. As I said, applicants will be placed into one of 5 priority bands, priority band 1, I should say, being the highest priority. And when we come to allocate empty homes, they're allocated in priority band order, then date order within those priority bands, and starting with those that have a local connection. Homes are offered to those next in line for a home, and applicants are not overlooked without a concrete reason. There's been a recent policy amendment, August 2023, which now enables officers to overlook other households on the housing register if it enables discharge of a homeless duty by allowing a homeless household to remain in temporary accommodation that's suitable to the housing needs. And that's what we mean by flipping a temporary accommodation. It's that you flip the temporary accommodation to a permanent secure contract for that household. Just explaining the sort of the priority bands themselves. We are required to give reasonable preference to certain groups in housing needs. Those are those that are homeless or threatened with homelessness, living in insanitary, overcrowded, or otherwise unsatisfactory housing conditions, those that have a medical or welfare need, or need to move a particular part of the locality, so a particular part of Powys, to avoid hardship to themselves or to others. We also have discretion within the allocation policy to give additional preference to those in urgent need within one of those reasonable preference groups. And we've done that by what we call the priority band 1 and priority band 2 categories. Priority band 1 is for those that are in exceptional circumstances. So each case would be considered by a panel drawn from the Homes in Powys partner landlords. And to join that priority band 1, applicants would need to demonstrate a specific, defined and evidenced housing need. So it's quite strict in terms of those that go into priority band 1. Priority band 2, these are those in urgent housing need, and there are some prescribed categories which make up that particular priority band 1. Key workers, service personnel seriously injured or disabled during service who require an adapted property, social housing tenants, either under-occupying their current social housing by 2 bedrooms or overcrowding 1-bedroom accommodation, or who owed a Section 75, that's a full homeless duty. Those households then that are not in housing need but want to be moved are placed in priority band 4, and households in housing need but not ready to move are placed into priority band 5. In terms of housing need, at the end of Q2, so at the end of September, there were 4,007 households on the Common Housing Register, and around 48% of those were in what we call housing needs, so either priority band 1, 2, or 3. As noted in the presentation, the greatest housing need is for those in 1-bedroom need, where we have about 55% of those on the housing register are requiring that type of size of accommodation. And as kind of referenced in the presentation, you can show the disparity because less than 20% of the social housing stock in Powys is 1-bedroom. And in terms of allocations, between April and September of this year, the vast majority of allocations, over 95%, were made to those in housing need. In terms of waiting times and availability, we've had a look at how long it's taking households to be allocated property between the start of this calendar year and the end of October. And on average, it's 387 days to be allocated a social housing property. And in the presentation, that's been broken down between the different priority bands. Historically, we have about 10% turnover of our social housing stock, but that does come with a bit of an asterisk. We're going to really challenge that sort of percentage turnover in light of the increased focus on tenancy sustainability. But historically, it's been about 10% turnover. And in terms of empty properties available, this relates to those within the council's housing stock. We had, as of sort of the middle of last week, we had about 200 empty properties, of which 21 of those were available for letting and 9 had been earmarked for use as temporary accommodation. In terms of allocations, the impact on homelessness as reflected in the report, the allocation policy is having a pronounced impact on meeting those in greatest housing need or homeless households. Between April and September, around 46% of our allocations were made to those who were either homeless or threatened with homelessness. And in addition to that, due to a policy amendment made in 2022, we're now able to flip temporary accommodation to settled accommodation, and 122 homeless households through those policy changes, allocation policy changes, have been able to remain in their current home. And on top of that, we currently have about 40 other households, homeless households, who are in the process of flipping their temporary accommodation to settled accommodation. As referenced in the report, one of the concerns was by giving homeless households additional priority on the Common Housing Register, it would actively encourage households to present as homeless. We do kind of keep a watching brief to see if that unintended consequence becomes a reality. And to date, it hasn't happened, but it's something that we do keep a watching brief on. In terms of then the impact of temporary accommodation on the Common Housing Register, this is a key concern for us as a housing services and partner community landlords. The intention, wherever possible, is to offset the need for bed and breakfast accommodation, which is prohibitively expensive. So it does require us to make a wide-ranging use of the accommodation that comes available for letting via the Common Housing Register. Currently, as a council, we use approximately 39% of our empty properties for temporary accommodation. So nearly 1 in 4 of our empty properties are top sliced for use of temporary accommodation rather than being relet through the Common Housing Register. And as reflected in the presentation and the report itself, at present, that requirement is falling disproportionately on the council, with nearly 80% or 78% as stated there of that temporary accommodation being met by our own housing stock, whilst partner community landlords are only providing 14% of that requirement. And when you look at the actual properties that we have in total, as a housing service, as a council, we have about 62% of the housing stock, whilst partner landlords have about 37.5%, nearly 38% of that accommodation. So you can see the disparity in terms of that provision. And as referenced in the presentation and the main body of the report, there's ongoing conversations with partner community landlords to try and get a fairer share in terms of meeting the need for temporary accommodation across our stocks. That's the end of the presentation, Councillor Langer. So I take any questions regarding the report or the presentation itself.
Lovely, thank you. So I open the floor to the committee, and Councillor Gary's first off. Your question, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. Very detailed, lots of figures in there, and we'd seen the reports beforehand. I guess really good to see some of that positive news around those people in homelessness that are finding permanent homes. That's really positive. Hard to jump back against your presentation, but I might ask a few specific questions, if I may, about some of the presentation there. I guess what worried me that even when we're prioritising needs in those bands, we're still struggling to effectively award a home any quicker, almost across any of the bands, aren't we? So band 1, 2 and 3 actually are struggling more, and I get the point. I think that's on the fact that most people are looking for 1-bedroom places. We've got big, large 3, 4, so they're easier to find and quicker to find. But it does worry me that even though we're prioritising them as a more urgent need, actually they're not far off a band 2 or a band 3. And perhaps I'll come back to some questions on that one in a minute. But where I was a little bit more confused was you mentioned that there's currently 200 empty properties. I think you said across the authority's estate, but is that across the authority or is that across the whole of the community housing partnership? It seems quite large if it's just our own empty properties.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Gary, I should clarify that. It's within our housing stock. So that's 200 empty homes within the council's housing portfolio. Yeah. Okay, and then what I guess worries me even more on those figures, particularly then, that I think the figures I'm right, but remind me or go back to the presentation. There was somewhere in the region of 21 currently being ready to let and another 9 seeking to be let. What do we do with the other 170? Are we just leaving them empty? Because that
that doesn't seem very sensible. Sorry, that's perhaps a bit of
No.
a loaded question, but yeah, give us a bit of a flavour of what happens with those, or why are we struggling with those empty ones that are there?
Thanks, Gary. The short answer to what is quite a complex sort of situation is that those properties are getting ready to let. So they're in the process of getting works done to meet the quality of accommodation standard. And once they are then sort of determined as ready to let, then we look to allocate those as quickly as possible. Within that 200 sort of referenced properties, there are some down in Pen y Bryn and Isle of Bryn estate down Ystrad, which are earmarked for regeneration. So they won't be actually available for letting, but at the moment, as we sit here around the virtual table, they're still classed as an empty property. So they do come within that 200, but the vast majority of those properties are being worked on to get them ready to let. And when they are ready, they'll then be allocated as quickly as possible.
Okay.
When you say, if I could just come in there, Gary, when you say regeneration, you mean refurbishment? We had a paper
No.
before this. Oh, no. We had
So
a paper before this committee about an estate that's going to be refurbished. That isn't those then?
what we're doing in Ystrad is working to demolish a number of the blocks of flats,
Yes.
which we've been unable to allocate for a significant period of time due to things like the bedroom tax. So
Yeah.
they need to be demolished, and better quality housing that will regenerate that estate built. So there's a piece of work happening around that, but the blocks of flats are currently empty. And as Richard said, they count towards that 200 total.
I think that's the paper that Andy bought before us previously, where the whole site has been refurbished or rebuilt, whatever. Okay, thank you. But if I can, sorry, Gary, butt in on you there. What you didn't say is when a property's void, how long on average does it take? And I take it's difficult if you've got people looking for a certain housing type in a certain location, it will be different. But is there an average time for a void?
Thanks, Councillor Angela. Yeah, in terms of total turnaround time, so this is taking in place the historical empty properties. It's taking on average 21 weeks from the end of one tenancy to the start of a new tenancy. If I could just qualify that turnaround time for empty properties that have become void or empty since the start of April, that figure is now down to under 12 weeks. And I stand to be corrected, but a key part of that improvement has been having an in-house team through housing quality team to actually kind of undertake those works in a much more sort of prompt and efficient manner, and that's really tracking through to an improvement in our overall empty property times.
Okay, lovely. Sorry, Gary, I interrupted you there. So back with Gary.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I guess I think we're aware of lots of the positive work that you're doing in the whole housing team, and with Matthew sort of supporting above you, if you like. So it's great to see some of those figures coming down, but obviously we will all be generally worried that it's still taking us 20 weeks, half a year to get a property into use, particularly when the figures are so high. But my final question on this one, but I'll let others come back in and then perhaps come in back towards the end if the question's not answered. But in terms of our 200 homes, is that reflected then across the other sort of partners within the community housing sector, the other social landlords? Because if it does, that, I was generally surprised that actually it's us that have got 200, but are all of the others sitting with a similar sort of figure?
It's a figure, Councillor Gary, that we need to check. I do know from the partner community landlords that, like ourselves, we try to get the properties turned around as quickly as possible. But I don't have a figure in terms of how much percentage of the empty stock they have at this present time.
No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Richard. Councillor Arwell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But certainly my first question has been answered with the allocation and what have you of time it takes to reallocate a property. So thank you for that. But the other one, well, it's just you mentioned sort of what is the criteria for band 3? You mentioned what was 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 and 5, but not band 3. Do we have an actual criteria for that?
We do, Councillor Alwell. It is captured in the presentation, but with regards priority band 3, you would fall into what we call a reasonable preference category group. And so that's if you're homeless, threatened with homelessness, if you're living in insanitary, overcrowded or unsatisfactory accommodation, if you've got medical or welfare needs, or you need to move to a certain part of Powys to receive or give support. And that's where the majority of households in housing need would come into priority band 3.
Okay, but it's a fine line really between 1, 2 and 3 really. There's not a lot of difference between them.
With regards priority band 2, you would, that's where you have additional preference, and there are sort of prescribed groups in housing need drawn from the reason preference category and number priority band 3 that come into priority band 2, and there's significantly less in priority band 2 and priority band 3, and then priority band 1 is where you're looking at exceptional circumstances.
Very few in that. Okay.
And again, there's less on priority band 1. Yes, Councillor. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Liz.
Oh, thank you. Just going back to the start of the process, Richard, I know that people register online for the Common Housing Register, and I know that the majority of people, are able to do that. But could you just explain what support's available to people that find it difficult to do that?
Yes, the second Councillor Liz. Yeah, wherever possible, we do encourage self-service. So, it's done sort of online where you can. If you can't, you can phone up our general number, and if able to, we can complete that application over the phone for you. But if you feel, well, no, I'd like to see someone face to face, then we'd arrange then for an officer to call to that individual to complete that application. And the date of application would be taken from the time you first contacted the service. So if it took a week to go out and complete the housing application, you wouldn't lose that week on the housing register. So wherever possible, if you can do it online, that would be the preferred option. But if not, over the telephone, but if not, in terms of differentiated service, then we'd actually arrange for an officer to call out and complete that application. We do then.
Thank you. That is reassuring, because I know quite a few people find themselves in that position. The same question I got was about band 3, because you said in the presentation there were 207 properties and it took 207 days. And I know people in this band that they're in unsatisfactory accommodation and they've also got medical needs. But my estimate would be that they've probably been waiting maybe 1,000 days. So I'm guessing that there are outliers, but it'd just be helpful to sort of know where that 207 falls. Yeah, in terms of the average, what would be the shortest, what would be the extreme, because it's I suppose what it's done, it's prompted me to probably start pestering a bit more about getting a couple of people rehoused, seeing that 207 figure. So it'd be good to have an explanation on that, or a bit more understanding, I suppose.
That's a very valid point, Councillor Liz. Obviously, with an average, you do take, that's sort of almost that midpoint, whatever. When there are sort of variations, there are some that would, be housed luckily quite quickly, but others then that would be taking, I would say, significantly above that 385 days on average it takes to get social housing property. So we can feed back in terms of the range of times it takes for each priority band in terms of rehousing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary, you've got your hand up again.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think similar to sort of Liz's point, obviously I've got, as we all have, got people on the waiting list in our area, and I sort of see them sat there for quite a while, and I sort of understand that there's a priority, but I wondered if there's a way. So one of the ones that we know is an issue, particularly in my sort of really rural ward, is sort of support from family for care needs, and well, generally across the authority, care needs is a real struggle, isn't it? But I've got people trying to move closer to existing younger family members that then could help look after them. and I'm not sure we're capturing that in our sort of scoring priority, because actually if we can get them closer to siblings where there is care, it alleviates a little bit of pressure on our struggling care system when they're stuck out in a rural place and having to get carers to travel to them. So I guess that's just, it's not really there for an answer, because I know it's not an easy fix, but just whether consideration could be made to just looking at how that might factor into some of those priorities, because I see that as a real positive both ways. It helps that person particularly, but actually it could alleviate a bit of pressure on a struggling service area elsewhere. And the other one was how broad is your thinking? And I've had good conversations with Andy, so I think I know the answer's pretty broad, but likes of Gwalia, maybe the wrong town, we've got lots of bed sits in Llandrindod, arguably, but our own office blocks, no one's using offices for offices anymore, and there's some really innovative work going on in other areas around flipping these into smaller units. We've got some lovely offices. Ladywell House might make some nice penthouse apartments in there, lovely glass panoramic views of some beautiful green spaces. But are we ambitious enough to look at that? Because we know that the problem is these smaller units, and we've got our own empty properties, and there's lots of other empty offices out there across the county that we could or should support, perhaps to be turned into accommodation. Puts income into close to our town centres in those priority areas of development where we've got. So maybe just to give us a bit of assurance perhaps, or comment that you're up for those challenges.
Okay, I think Matthew, were you looking to come in there?
Yeah, if
Although I can see Andy's nodding away as well.
If I pick up on Councillor Mitchell's second question, yes, absolutely, we're up for looking at that. We're really determined to increase the number of units to meet demand. And what you're talking about there is conversations that me and the portfolio holder for planning have had and continue to have. But the numbers have to stack up for the housing revenue account, and we need to ensure that it demonstrates best value for our tenants and that account. And that's not always the case. We've looked at some of the council's corporate properties, and we're just not able to make that a viable option in terms of the grant and the HRA, the housing revenue account, which means we can't proceed. But if we can have discussions about social value transfers of the council's corporate assets to the housing revenue account, so that we can deliver these council taxpayers in perpetuity and deliver rents and deliver an impact on the housing waiting list that's positive, then we're willing to proceed. But it's not always possible when the numbers don't stack up for the HRA.
Okay, thank you for that, Matthew. So I've got a few questions to add into the end there. So we've talked about the ban definitions, and they are set out there, and they're set out there in the Homes in Powys Allegation Scheme document. But I'm concerned about if we're in band 1 or 2, I think we can assume that we've got some people in vulnerable situations because they're having a priority need. So if they're in that situation, I suppose it's following on from Liz's question about the fact that it's an online system. So I'm reassured that there's an alternative system there for people who can't cope with that. But who else feeds into that? And I'm aware of a particular case, and it can't be unique, where that person is in a housing need, has lots of different issues going on within the home, but wouldn't be able to advocate that for themselves. So for other agencies to feed in, how would they know? So what is the system there? So you've got somebody whose house, for whatever reason, isn't appropriate for the family's needs. How do the other agencies who work with that family know to feed into the housing register for the banding?
Thanks, Councillor Langer. We have regular multi-agency meetings with our partner community landlords, but also wider organisations that have an involvement in the housing need. We regularly raise awareness of the Homes in Powys allocation policy, and we actively consult with those that have an interest in meeting housing need in terms of any changes. And it's a key point that there are some individuals that are not able to express the housing need that they're in. So that's when we would look at that advocacy. And we do take on board any supporting letters, any correspondence, and when need be, if that person is in dire housing need, then we would take it in front of a panel to consider if they should be given priority band 1. And at those meetings, the applicant can present information themselves, or if they have someone acting as advocate, then again, they can attend on their behalf to do so.
So, so is that a formal process? So I guess for you, the eyes and ears in the community are us, the councillors. So if we hear of something, there must be a formal structured process whereby we can let you know.
Yeah, well, I would say,
I mean, is it like Liz says, is it that he who shouts loudest, you know, will get your attention?
Thank you, Councillor Angela. It's a difficult one because we kind of respond to housing need, but we are aware that there are a number of unmet support needs in our local communities. So it's raising awareness of the processes that we have in place. And for those that are actively involved with households, it's almost a checks and balance and checking, are they on the Common Housing Register? What priority band are they in? I don't think that's in keeping with the the current housing needs, and that can be considered. But it's through the likes of ourselves around this virtual table and others, just to raise awareness, so we can make sure that each and every person's housing need is being actively considered.
Okay, that's lovely. I mean, I am reassured that once people are on your radar, that the local authority is providing an awful lot of support. I've been to meetings with you and I've heard about that support. So it's really those really most vulnerable, how we get them on the radar to start with. And obviously, there will be people who are unknown about, isn't it? But thank you very much for that. That gives me some reassurance. The other question I have, I can see Councillor Arwell's got his hand up, but if you'll bear with me for a second, just a small point. On table 1 of the report, there is a small typo. It just says no where it should say not under the band 4, just a small thing. But on table 2 and table 3, where you're setting out the different numbers waiting in the waiting list, basically, applicants by bed size. I wonder, would it be possible to have the tables for each band, each bed size? So that would be a lot more tables, I appreciate. But so, for example, in table 2, you've got 28 people in band 1 wanting a 1-bed property. So, like how long have they been waiting, I suppose? It's back to that question, isn't it, of the length of waiting time, because you have pointed out that the people in bands 1 and 2 seemingly are waiting longer than those in band 3.
Can I just make a comment on that, Chair,
yes,
if I
please
can?
do. I think I'm probably not making myself clear.
No, I do understand the question, but I think part of the reality of the situation is where we've got high demand areas for housing, turnover is usually less because they're areas of high demand. And when somebody wants to live in that area and join the list, even if they're in band 1 or 2, the wait period is still significant. So housing officers are then having to say to people on the list, well, will you widen your search? So if you want to live in the Machynlleth area and it's a high demand area, you're going to be on the list sometime. So if you widen your search, you can potentially be housed earlier. And it's not always possible for that to happen. Some of the reasons that Councillor Mitchell was talking about earlier, care needs, for example, you need to be close to family. And that sometimes leaves people on the list longer because the area that they're able to live in is smaller. And so I think that's an unintended consequence of the system, but it's a very real one that housing officers and housing professionals are facing on a daily basis.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, you explained that clearly, and I suppose that leads me on to the next question, where we've got in Powys over 5,000 properties, but 4,000 on a waiting list. So yeah, I've got a concern, and you must have that too, that we're never going to clear that waiting list.
Well, I do have that concern, yes, but officers regularly undertake a process of checking with people that they still have a housing need and that they're in the right banding, and that happens on a 6-monthly basis now. But despite that high number of people on the list, if you look at the numbers, actually about 50% of them are in housing need and 50% in housing want, so people wanting to move, not necessarily needing to move. So we actively manage that. Officers are on this all the time and ensuring that people in housing need are in the appropriate bands.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. That's reassuring as well. And then the last one, then the property's flipped, and that makes total sense to me that once somebody's moved into temporary home, they like that home, they're happy there, the landlord's happy with them, that can become their permanent home. But if 122 properties were flipped, that means 122 were taken off the temporary list. So are you then actively seeking another 122 to put back on that list?
That's a really valid question, Councillor Angela. We currently have 45 households in bed and breakfast, another 14 in expensive private rented sector temporary accommodation. So there is an ongoing need for suitable settled accommodation, suitable temporary accommodation, hence the reference in the presentation to nearly 40% of our empty properties being used as temporary accommodation and not allocated to the Common Housing Register. So the more that we flip, there's still X number waiting for suitable temporary accommodation, yes.
Yeah. So it's a chicken and an egg, getting that balance right, isn't it? Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Arwell, you've been very patient. Sorry, indulging me there.
Well, no, actually, your last question was one of my questions, really. Because obviously switching properties from temporary accommodation into permanent, well, we're only going to increase the bed and breakfast issue in hotels and what have you. Because you mentioned the cost of over £1 million. Well, that figure is going to get worse, isn't it, really? And have you found that the number of homeless in Powys is increasing over the years, or is it a fairly static number, please? Thank you.
That's Councillor Alwell. Yes, the number is increasing in terms of homeless presentations. It is reflected in our rapid housing transition plan, where we've mapped it out over the last few years, and it's gone up by hundreds of percent in terms of increased presentations. But conversely, we have improved our homeless prevention rates, because if someone is threatened with homelessness, that is our key intention, to avoid that homeless presentation. So I think homelessness is symptomatic of wider issues in our communities and the economy, and it's a very visible, stark representation of housing needs. So homeless presentations have increased disproportionately. I think it is driven as well, I would say, by changes in legislation, where it's basically everyone would come in during COVID, where you dispensed with priority need. In effect, that has continued, because if you're at risk of street homelessness, then you're classed as a priority need. And if you've got nowhere to stay that night, then it's temporary accommodation. And because we have lack of temporary accommodation, invariably it ends up in bed and breakfast as the first port of call.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Richard, for that.
That's totally.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So no more hands up there. So thank you very much, Richard. That was a very thorough report and presentation. There was one question that came up in our pre-meeting, which I'll just ask, but I think I know the answer to this, and that was, do the same regulations apply for temporary accommodation?
They do, Councillor Angela, in terms of the standard of the accommodation that's provided, and in effect as well, household, if they don't have white goods, they will be provided with white goods, because we look to furnish that accommodation with intention that household can move in there and then to take on that occupation contract.
Thank you. Councillor Matthew, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to make a final comment, if I could, on the homes in Powys policy. I think we've got a robust policy in place that enables officers to make informed and sound decisions based on need for housing. And I think that the committee can be assured that is in place despite the unprecedented demand for social housing in Powys.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew. I think from this presentation and those we've had previously with housing officers, we are reassured that an awful lot of work is going on in the housing department to support our most vulnerable residents and those who just need a nice home. And I was reassured when you mentioned finance and value that is also being taken into account, because whilst I am sure you could do a lot more with a lot more money, the council is facing also challenging times. So thank you very much for that. So thank you all. And we move on to the next item on our agenda, which is linked to this really, and it's item 7, the Rapid Housing Transition Plan. Councillor Arwell, I think your microphone is live at the moment. So who's going to take us through this presentation?
Thanks, Chair. Richard's got another presentation for us on this one, but it is, I think, an exciting piece of work and is truly transformational if we're able to deliver it, and sets a direction of travel for us as a council over the next 5 years, and how we'll work with partners to prevent homelessness and increase settled accommodation for the people of Powys. Richard, over to you, please, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Matthew. Thanks, Councillor Angela. Looking to share my screen again, just by way of an introduction to this report. But as you touched upon, Councillor Angela, it does really there's a lot of synergy between the Rapid Housing Transition Plan and the policy amendments we've made to our allocation policy in terms of addressing homelessness. So I'll just share my screen. Go ahead.
While you're doing that, Richard, I'll just point out to members that Jake has shared a briefing in the chat about long-term voids of property, so it might be something you want to look at some point. We're not seeing anything yet, Richard, but no pressure. We're not all sat here looking at you.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Angela.
No problem.
I don't seem to be able to share this particular sort of
I've got it. Can I share it? Let me have a look. Oh golly, I don't know. Is Rachel there? Do you have a copy of the PowerPoint? Can you share it? No, Rachel's gone quiet.
I'll give it another go, Councillor, if you can just bear with me.
Okay. Yes. Oh, there we are. Something's happening. There we are. Well done, Richard.
No pressure at all. So can you all see the...
We can see your full screen, yeah, with the slides alongside, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So as I said, just by introduction to this particular report, what we look to do in the report is just draw out what we mean by the rapid rehousing and the fact what's captured in Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan. As Councillor Matthew has sort of alluded to, we've got a 5-year plan in place, which has been driven by ourselves as Housing Services, the wider council and partner organisations. The intention, wherever possible, is to prevent homelessness, but where it can't be prevented is to minimise the time that a household spends in temporary accommodation until they are provided with settled accommodation. And for us, it's about right home with the right support to reflect those circumstances. Whilst the Rapid Housing Transition Plan has a 5-year focus, there are some key initial priorities that we're looking to deliver against. Those are the introduction of 2 instant access 24/7 triage centres, where the intention is that an applicant who's threatened or actually homeless can present. There would be almost a multi-agency hub there. The intention is to do a full assessment of housing and support needs, and if required, provide short-term temporary accommodation, whilst more sort of longer-term accommodation is secured to reflect those identified support needs. Running alongside that would be the provision of complementary 24/7 supported accommodation. And all 4 schemes would be 12 units for each scheme. And the idea is to have 1 scheme for instant access 24/7 triage centres and support accommodation in the north and equivalent in the south of the county. Also looking to provide modular interim accommodation. and the intention is to provide 20 units of that, which ostensibly it's kind of factory built, the prefab sort of accommodation, to offset the need for bed and breakfast and the wider use of temporary accommodation. As kind of referenced in the previous report, key driver is to flip temporary accommodation wherever possible. Introduction of a homeless triage, first point of contact service, and I apologise, we used the word triage in a number of connotations in the report, but the intention behind this homeless triage first point of contact service is that when a household kind of contacts us in housing need, there is a full assessment of those housing needs at that point of contact, with the intention of keeping them in the current home wherever possible, and to reflect the sort of the complexity of the individuals that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, looking to further embed a trauma-informed approach to service delivery. So in terms of progress against those key priorities, we do have indicative capital funding secured from the Council's General Fund for the triage centres and the supported accommodation, and also for those 20 modular units of interim accommodation. As reflected in the report and in the presentation, there's no complementary revenue monies secured as yet, but the intention is for that to be considered as part of the 24-25 budget setting process. But as we speak, capital monies, the indicative amount has been secured, but no revenue monies. And on this, just finish off this particular slide, as yet, no sites have been identified for either the triage, support accommodation, or the modular units. In terms of the flipping of that temporary accommodation, 122 homeless households have been able to remain in their current temporary accommodation, and we've got a further 40 households that are in the process of doing so. With regards to that homeless triage first point of contact service, we've refocused the work of our housing support officers to kind of really work upstream, to work with individuals, families, households, wherever possible, to avoid the need for that homeless presentation by keeping them in their current accommodation. And with that trauma-informed approach, we're ensuring that staff, when they have that challenging conversation, are having those regular debriefs with their line managers and wider staffing sort of colleagues, just to kind of decompress and pick what that issues were, those concerns, before they move on then to deal with maybe what is another sort of challenging case the very same day. As we touched upon, the delivery of the Rapid Housing Transition Plan is underpinned by that kind of real focus on homeless prevention by ourselves, council colleagues and partner organisations, centred on early intervention and making sure that households can readily access support as needed. And this is very much a part of a wider, longer-term approach that we've adopted at Housing Services, and is having an impact in terms of homeless caseload. So while there's been an increase in homeless presentations, we have seen a reduction in those sort of open cases between the end of January 22 and 26th of November this year. Overall cases, so that's when you include your threatened with homelessness and those pending inquiries, they've reduced by 22%. And over the same period, statutory homeless cases, so where you've accepted a homeless duty, they've reduced by nearly 29% over that same time period. And in terms of resource implications, during the last financial year, there was a net cost of over £1.2 million from the Council's General Fund to meet the homeless service. A key driver behind those high costs was the high use of bed and breakfast and private sector temporary accommodation, which is attracting basically an A and B and B rate. Some really high sort of daily costs that we incur in that type of accommodation. And that sort of demand hasn't diminished compared to the last financial year. And with that, it's estimated that the current weekly net cost of those using bed and breakfast and that expensive private rented sector temporary accommodation is in excess of £33,000. And as touched upon really in the report, but the presentation, the projected number of households, we'll be looking at a similar level of net cost expenditure. And that's despite an increase in Welsh Government monies to offset the need of bed and breakfast. It just evidences that that particular element of a housing need is kind of a high ongoing cost for us, hence the need to move to those triage centres and supported accommodation, because we have a number of individuals in bed and breakfast that best endeavours in with intensive support in terms of their journey, whether in terms of their life circumstances, they would require that supported accommodation. And at the moment, they're kind of well in bed and breakfast. So I think that's the end of the presentation, Councillor Langer. So I take any questions regarding the presentation or the report itself.
Lovely. Once again, thank you, Richard. The report and the presentation together give us a really good overview of what's going on, and appreciate that. So open to the committee for any questions. So Councillor Corinna.
Just wondering about the modular housing, and you say you haven't got any planning permission for any sites yet, and I'm just thinking where these are permanent. I know they're modular, but they're permanent dwellings, aren't they? They've got to be connected. No, sorry.
Yes, Councillor. I mean, I don't know if Andy wants to come in on this, but the intention behind modular units is a meanwhile use, is that you may have a longer term intention in terms of bricks and mortar, but the infrastructure has to be in place. And the idea then when it is, you can move at pace in terms of those factory built units to link them up and get individuals moved into them.
Could I come back on that? I mean,
yeah, please do.
This might sound very wrong, but we've got a very large car park in Knighton. Would that be a suitable, that's you know, it's contentious, but you could say it might be slightly underused. I mean, would that be a site you might look at, or and what sort of support might be offered to the few modules that might be built there? I mean, I really don't know.
Do you want me to come in, Richard?
Yes, please do, Andy.
Yes, those are the sort of sites that you'd look at, but they need to be connected to all the utilities. So there'd have to be water supply, sewerage, electricity, and what have you. And we would have to get planning permission. As Richard has explained, it's kind of like a meanwhile use. So, for example, I think it was Cardiff did modular on the site of an old gasworks, which had all the utilities there and was going to be repurposed and reused for something else in the future. When I was working in the south coast of England, Brighton did a similar scheme using converted shipping containers. That was a meanwhile use. The meanwhile use has now ended, and it's been used for permanent housing. So yeah, we can look at those sites, absolutely. I mean, the car park at County Hall is a site we can consider, but it's almost as expensive to prepare the site for modular as it is for permanent housing. But as Richard said, it does give us the advantage that, say you had a site earmarked for a supermarket and it wasn't going to be built for 5 years, you'd come to a deal, put the infrastructure in, the modular units go there, and then in 5 years' time, modular units back of a Scania and took somewhere else. It's Powys finding those sites, because we're not an industrialized or urbanized area. You know, we don't have lots of, as they probably say, have in Cardiff or the West Midlands, old industrial sites that you could use. We desperately need the sites, and I'll certainly ask the team to look at Knighton Car Park, though they probably already have. We're looking at caravan sites, things of that nature. But the only note of caution I have to add is that we have to get planning permission for them. You have to get the same. Cardiff got theirs through in that 12-month kind of moratorium there was during COVID, on permitted planning. I mean, Councillor Berryman probably knows more about the planning issue, but there was a small period of time when you could basically do things that linked to COVID and have a lesser planning consent, but that is no longer the case. So yeah, we are desperate for those sites. And Richard says 20. That doesn't mean 20 in one place. It could be 5 in one place. You know, they're relatively easy to move around. They're high quality units. They do have a lifespan of probably 10 years. Well, I think the Brighton ones lasted a lot longer, but it's just somewhere to put them. I mean, I'm always pleading for people who know, but we are looking desperately at the moment because £33,000 a week out of the general fund is unsustainable. And I'm afraid we're stuck with this position. So I don't know if just Richard referred to the other two. There's 3 strands to enhanced homelessness. The other 2, the triage centres and the interim supported accommodation. We do have capital approval for those, but the revenue is going to be needed to operate those. And they're not an overnight hit. You know, it's going to take 2 or 3 years. We've got to find the sites. We've got to develop the schemes. We've got to get all that in place, which until phosphates is resolved is going to be challenging south of Radar. But it's the revenue that we need, because there's no point building these schemes if we can't provide the support. It will be cheaper than what we're doing now, but there will be a transition phase. And what we do need to have is the surety that if we go ahead and we invest a lot of the council's money in, building the schemes, that we have the revenue to run them as we want. Because longer term, the idea is it will reduce repeat homelessness. I don't know, Richard, we have, 24% of our clients have been homeless before. And that's, partly a reflection of a changing housing market. Housing is way more expensive than it used to be. I was speaking to one of our officers who's taken his first home, 35-year mortgage. I mean, that would have been unbelievable when I was that age. Sorry, Councillor, sorry, I can see you got your hand up. I do apologise.
Thanks. Can I just
Matthew,
add a
did you want
point
to come
that,
in
Chair?
there? Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Because Andy's rightfully made the point that we've got the capital in place, but we need to move to a point where we, through the FRM, the finance resource model, put the revenue in place to run these facilities. That's right, but we shouldn't see these in isolation as a council, because all of these things are interdependent, and if we are able to properly support people through their accommodation, then we'll reduce the cost on social care, children's services, health and education. So whilst we will increase the cost short term, actually we will save more and produce better outcomes for the people of Powys by doing this, and that's why I believe this is truly transformational.
Yeah, I think the phrase is spend to save, isn't it, on the long term, that we're to spend up front, but we will have an asset that the council can use in the years going forward. And as you say, if that support is in place for the individuals going into this modular home, then hopefully that helps them to support them going into a more permanent home. But I guess that is still a challenge, isn't it? Because we've still got limited number of houses across the county. And what you wouldn't want is for people to go into these modular homes and then there not to be somewhere for them to move on to. But I guess that's the same as the bed and breakfast.
Absolutely,
anyway, I can
but they'll have their own front door, Chair. They'll have their own front door.
Yes. Much safer, much nicer. Yeah, a sense of belonging. Councillor Gary, you've got your hand up. Apologies, committee. Your hands are going up.
No,
Over
thanks,
to you.
Yeah, I think just carrying on to Corinna's point, and arguably I would say there's plenty of opportunities to place some of these modular units around the county and using our rural nature of the county to its advantage, that actually there's a lot of green spaces that these could be placed on. Fully get that they've got to be fully connected, but there are ways of doing that in a more sort of climate ready way as well, so they could be almost off grid if we chose to go down that route. I think my question was more around, well, how do we help the teams look at potential sites so we could get out there and explore some other options. I know talking to you around how we get community involvement in some of these ideas, because there's communities wanting to do similar stuff already in some of our places. And arguably planning permission shouldn't be a problem. You've only got to look at the number of log cabin parks that we've got across the authority and think, well, surely that's then quite easy to do. But I think design would be absolutely key. I wouldn't want to be a councillor offering keys to a new, even if it's a 5-year temporary home, just shoved in the corner of a car park without real thought about how it looks and feels. We don't want to be creating the sort of the the feel of the presence that we're just putting more sort of traveller community sites around the authority. They are quite different, and we've sort of got duties to do that anyway. So I think, yeah, just urging sort of let's move quickly, but let's put some real consideration into how they do development. I did go and see the one in Cardiff when it was being developed, and their turnaround was quite amazing, just in how they flipped particularly younger people into these units that were actually very accepting of being there and very grateful for being there and creating quite a community around them. So I've certainly seen the positives. And my other question was really, I'm not sure how far down that sort of build route we are yet. Are we still earmarking the capital to do it, or have we begun to commission some of these modular units? And then, depending on how far we go, are we looking at using some of our own in-county modular homes builders that we have? Always very keen to see that sort of Powys pound. We've lost one in relatively recent years because of competition taking over, I suppose. But I think the one in Knighton is still going and building units. So yeah, just keen to see how far we are down that modular journey.
So who would like to take that question? Basically the timeline, really, I guess, is what you're asking, isn't it, Gary? Andy.
Richard and Councillor Dorrance, I'm happy to answer that. The timeline, it's finding the sites. Wouldn't want to buy the units until we'd got the sites, because once you've placed the order, the factories want to get them built and delivered. I'm afraid because of the cost, it's likely to be included within our procurement rules, and we'd have to go out to tender and have open competition. So while we naturally would hope it were Powys or Welsh or British suppliers, that's not always guaranteed, but I would hope that it would be, that we'd get local providers for this. The critical factor for us is getting a site. The minute we got a site, we can actually place an order and almost time it for when the site will be ready. So that, you know, these are like ordering, it's no different than ordering a lorry. Basically, there's a timeline. When do you want it? You need it in October, we'll start building it in September, you know, and we need to be in a position that we've got somewhere to put it in October. It is sites, and I see where you're coming from. I never really thought of off-grid, but it is something we could think about. It's again, it's also the cost factors of this, you know, for sewerage and for water, but we certainly need to look at these things. It's in our own estate and looking at other sites that are being developed with private people as well. But it is a challenge. I'm sorry, I'm not going to sugar the pill. Finding these sites is a real problem. They don't have to be big. You know, it can be 5 units and they will look good. You know, I would not allow something that looks horrible. They've got to look nice so people don't go, ugh. They've got to look nice, and they can be nice looking as well. You know, I've seen some really nice designs there. So I'm sorry, I don't know if Richard or Councillor Dorrance would like to come in on that.
No, I think you've covered that, Andy.
Lovely, thank you. Liz, you've got your hand up now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this proposal to have the prefabricated modules and the triage system is a really good one, and it's, you know, trying to solve a problem that really has been building up for many years due to lack of investment in you know, local authority accommodation. You know, an increase in numbers of people that you know, find themselves homeless for all sorts of reasons that are not really you know, of their making. I did wonder, you know, you mentioned, I think, Andy, the revenue costs, and I was just thinking, you know, is there a plan maybe to redeploy people from different places into the triage support system, you know, so that, you know, you would get maybe people from different, you know, multi-agency organisations to support the people once they're in the modular accommodation, and, you know, maybe, you know, that would, you know, cut costs, because I'm guessing that, you know, there could be an assumption that we're going to employ a load of people and this is going to cost a lot of money, but I'm guessing that, you know, that could be worked through other organisations and partners.
There will be some redeployment, but the main area of redeployment will be that we're not spending money on bed and breakfast and privately provided accommodation, which generally doesn't have the support. So the overall cost will come down, but instead of paying 90 to 120 pounds a night for a bed and breakfast room, that over the course of 7 days pays for a support worker and the capital cost of providing our own schemes, be that through the modular or through the triage centre or the 24/7 interim supported accommodation. So it's really a case of more of redeployment of resources rather than people. So it's rather than spending, as I say, a large amount of money and getting something that is probably suboptimum, and that's not to criticize, people are doing the best they can to help us. We get a lot more for our buck. So, and absolutely, the idea of the triage centres is that although the council probably oversee them, if somebody's got an issue, say with substance abuse, we bring in Kaleidoscope, the charity that helps people with that. If people have got mental health, bring people in to help them with that. The idea is that we provide the safe environment where somebody can be safe while we assess what they need. And that assessment is done with the experts, which may or may not be the council, depending on the particular needs that someone has. And then you can move them either into permanent accommodation, or we have to accept some people are not able to survive in permanent accommodation, self-contained accommodation, in some kind of supported. But this is definitely a spend to save, but it does require a little bit of a leap of faith in so much as, we're going to have to do this, but there will be a crossover time. Sorry, I'll shut up. I think Councillor Jones and Richard have got their hands up. Sorry.
Yes, I can see Richard. Did you want to come in at that point?
I did. Thanks, Councillor Angela. Just building on Andy's point, it does represent, I would say, spend to save, value for money, but equally coming back to the individual, it's avoiding that individual having to tell their story twice. We are trying to develop a trauma-informed approach to service delivery, and to take someone that's been through it, having to tell their story to X number of professionals from different sort of professions, you do risk re-traumatizing. So that's one of the key drivers behind the triage centres, is to kind of have that multi-agency assessment then and then. So just one story and the relevant players are aware of it on a timely fashion. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, Liz?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Adrian.
Thanks, Chair. Could you have a bit more detail on the triage centres and what exactly you mean? Are you describing like a bed and breakfast place, or what is it? Is it a new build you're going to put up, or is it just a
So what's it actually going to look like? You're saying, Adrian? How's it going to work?
Is it a bed and breakfast accommodation, or is it flats? I don't quite understand what they are.
Yeah, if I come in there, the idea is that they would be self-contained flats, or bedsites, if you will, because the Welsh Government is very clear that people in homeless accommodation, temporary accommodation, should have their own, bathing facilities, their own toilet facilities, their own cooking facilities. Absolutely right, because if you're traumatized, the last thing you want to do is be battling somebody in a kitchen. The idea is that we develop these as, say, self-contained bedsits or flats, small apartments. Which can, if needs be, accommodate, 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 people, the kind of thing you can do. The thinking being that if they were ever not needed for homelessness, which is unlikely in my lifetime, I suspect, but they could easily be used as permanent accommodation. So they would be pretty much to that same standard. Now, that could be through new build, or it could be through conversion of existing properties, whatever's the best option for us. We've talked earlier today around conversions of offices and so on and so forth, commercial buildings, as the world moves to a more sort of remote online environment. But it's got to be the right buildings, and it's got to fit, as Councillor Dorrance said earlier, there's the financial side of it. They would be held within the general fund, because homelessness is a general fund function. So if properties were used for this purpose that Richard's report has covered, that wouldn't be in the housing revenue account, they would be in the general fund. But they would look no different than just a regular flatted block or mansion house or whatever. You wouldn't know from the outside what it was being used for. And that's always the view of everything should look 10-year blind. You just walk down the street, oh, that's a flat, somebody lives there, rather than knowing what use it is. So that's absolutely critical in what we'd like to do, which is why almost conversions work. So yes, it would be, that's the aim. And then people have, even when they're in temporary accommodation, their own front door, which is a critical point for their safety, their well-being, and also giving us the privacy to work with people if they need it. Some people only been there for 2 or 3 days. Everything's fine, they'll be able to move on. Some people will be with us for a lot longer, and that's why we've double phased it. Yeah. But the critical factor, of course, is move on accommodation. We don't want it. Yeah.
Lovely. I mean, there's no more hands up there. So, I mean, for my part, I think this is a really ambitious, it's a really positive paper. There's nothing not to like about it, I guess, except for that part that we haven't got any timing, because you aren't able to come and say, by next June, we will have X number of properties in X locations across Powys, that we're not there. So I think for me, I'm anxious to see that. It would be obviously really a positive step forward when we're able to get to that. I was really pleased to hear about the trauma-informed working ways. I think that is really important. So thank you for putting that across, Richard. And I noted there that there is support for the staff. And I think that's something very, very important. We're focusing on the vulnerable residents, but of course there's going to be impacts on the staff. So I was very pleased that you'd recognise that and put in a strategy to support them. I'm just wondering, are you having any feedback? Is that proving to be popular? Is it helping the staff? How do you know?
It is, Councillor Angela. It's something that, it's pivotal really to our service delivery. It's enabling our staff to give the best version of themselves for each and every sort of applicant that they deal with. And it's recognising that you need time to decompress, to offload, because we've all got that emotional saturation point. And equally, as part of that trauma-informed service delivery model, it's recognising that we can inadvertently re-traumatize it, those individuals that we're dealing with. So we've got to be, cognizant to that. So we're checking our terminology, the way that we interact. So there's a bundle of support that's in place for our staff, but it comes down to supporting that member of staff to make sure they don't feel isolated, and to really unpick, unpack those challenging calls, challenging interactions, so that they can feel ready and able to take on the next call when it comes.
Lovely, thank you, Richard. Well, again, no hands up, so I think we're coming to the end of this section, but I will just say congratulations to everybody involved. This is a really optimistic paper, and I don't think we've thought of anything that you haven't already thought of in that paper, so thank you very much for that. Yeah, no more hands up, so no comments, so well done and thank you. And as I say, very much look forward to hearing those timelines and seeing how it develops. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so we move on now to item. Oh, hang on. No, let me just scroll down. There's an item missing off my agenda there. So we're on item 8, which is our working farms group. We've got a proposal from the group, and I believe Councillor Gary, are you going to bring this forward for us as chair, or is it Councillor James Gibson-Watt as portfolio holder?
Probably myself, unless you wanted to, James. I'm absolutely happy either way.
No, Chair, would not be appropriate for me. Gary's the chair of the group, and it's his paper. It must be. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
And yeah, I guess just briefly, a bit of a background almost. But first to say I'm very grateful of all of the councillors, the officers, and the whole team that have supported the sort of learning that the Farm Estate Working Group have been on over the last 12 months or more. It's actually been very pleasurable. I've certainly learnt loads, and I know many others within the group have learnt a lot as well. And we've all got our own areas of interest, definitely, and I think that helps sort of create that sort of good, lively discussion debate that we've had over many of the meetings. And we've been out and talked to some of our tenant farmers, which is always really nice to do. So we've had several farm visits. We've actually met on 2 occasions the Tenant Panel Association to talk through some of their concerns and some of our ideas. And we've actually heard from other local authorities as well. We've brought in some other local authority sort of farm estate portfolio holders or leads to give us some of thinking around how they might do stuff. And arguably we've landed in a position where a lot of the group are sort of thinking those next steps. What could more we do with the farm estate? What is it currently doing? How's it managed? Is it best delivering for all of the council's needs in terms of finance, nature recovery, food production, homes, retirement plans, all of those sorts of things? And I guess we've sort of had a clear indication now that we're stepping outside the breach of scrutiny and moving into the realms of sort of co-developing ideas, looking at helping shape future farm policy, if you like, for the authority. And because of that, we can't be seen to be marking our homework within the ERC Scrutiny Committee. So the paper is requesting that the committee allow us effectively to disband, but I would urge just a bit of caution on language we use. The tenants panel group certainly got upset that they thought we'd already been asked to disband as a group after sort of getting together and meeting with them. So just a bit of careful messaging perhaps. And effectively seeking then cabinet approval to create a cabinet advisory group, firmly leaving scrutiny of whatever that might group do and wider farm estate scrutiny in the hands of the ERC Scrutiny Committee and you as chair and the other councillors. And if, for instance, we'd developed policy around the farm estate and it comes to scrutiny, those in the cabinet advisory group would declare their interest. And if it's a significant interest, clearly we wouldn't take part in the debate or certainly wouldn't hold any votes and things like that. And in some cases would absolutely leave you to it and walk out of the discussion and look at the news later on in the reports afterwards. So I think that's the position we're in. We've discussed it and debated it within the farm working group a few times now. And I think we've had the sort of the legal guidance, if you like, the legal nudge to say, yeah, now is the time to move. And I wouldn't say the entire group were wholly supportive of it, but can see the need as to why we're there. So happy to take any questions, or for others, Jake, James, to come in if needs be as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gary. Yeah, reading through the paper, for me, it sounds like a really exciting opportunity for members of the group really to drive policy and be there at the sort of inception of any new ideas. The fact that any proposals will come back to ERC scrutiny, I don't have an issue with that. I think this committee are more than capable of scrutinising the work of any farm group, as we do a number of projects across the council. And I guess for members who are currently members of the Working Farms Scrutiny Group, it will be, well, I suppose, yes, clarity then, a question. So will the members of the current Working Farms Scrutiny Group automatically go across, or will they all have the option to choose, they may prefer to remain in a scrutiny role, so therefore not take part in this new committee? So yeah, I'm getting nods that for clarity there. Lovely.
Yeah, just on that one, there's definitely so if it's the exception, sorry, the recommendation is accepted, the group would disband and a new cabinet advisory group formed once cabinet give their approval. There would be some conditions over membership, if you like, so seeking political balance, having a terms of reference to sign up to, and then we would seek names and nominations. Now, I would clearly hope that those that are sitting on the existing group that want to transfer and meet the criteria, if you like, do so, because one of the constraints that we've got is the current working group is quite broad in terms of party representation and independent representation, etc. People are there because they want to be, which is great. Yeah. So we've just got to almost round peg square hole to a degree, but I'm confident all of that can be overcome with seconding people in, particularly those with specialist interests, etc., etc. But Jake may want to come in a little bit more on that specific one.
Okay, well, I've got a hand up from Councillor Adrian, but would you prefer to come in first, Jake?
I just want to answer that point, and Gary has done it very nicely. But just to say, I've got a draft email to Clive on just waiting for me to press, should you make a decision today, as has been indicated, which basically Clive has given advice about political representation, balance, etc., etc. The conversation that we've had that was reflected in the last farm working group is that actually only some of the members in the existing farm working group are members of the ERC, and therefore obviously some of those will take a view whether to come back, as it were, and play an active role here, or to come across to the new group. But we also need to find a way to
Sorry, you're breaking up a bit there, Councillor
We
Jake.
also need to find a way of making sure that others get invited in there. And I think Gary's used the term secondment. So I'm happy to invite many people with skills and experience, knowledge into that tent, albeit technically Clive will say, if it comes to a vote, only those actually in the committee will need to be able to vote on that. But I think that inclusivity is really important. It's the way that the existing working arrangements has been shaped, and I'm very keen that they continue to operate in that collegiate way that we have so successfully under Gary's chair. It will be for the group to pick a chair, I'd hope. At the moment, my view is I hope they might pick Gary, but there we
That'll
are.
Be up to the group.
It won't, but it won't be James and myself. We
No.
don't believe we should be chairing that.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Jake. So, Councillor Adrian, you had your hand up. Do you want to ask any? Yeah.
It's not asked a question. Thank you, Chair. It was about the point of being on ERC scrutiny and going to the advisory group, because one or two members who are on ERC said they didn't want to go onto the advisory group because they wanted to stay on the scrutiny. But we obviously covered that now, and it's quite simple, straightforward, and at least one person's changed their mind that they would go over to the advisory group and just express preferential interest in anything that's comes for ERC. So you wanted noting, and it's not quite totally explained in the agenda, but Gary's covered it, so it was quite a point really. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much. So any members of the committee got any questions or queries on this? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor James, you've got your hand up, so I'd like to speak to us. Sorry, you're on mute as well, James. It's going to be the most famous phrase of the year, isn't it?
My apologies. I was just waiting to see if there were any other questions before coming in. I think what from my perspective, my particular interest is that we get this comprehensive review of the policy framework around the farms estate underway as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And I presume, although this hasn't really been established, that if the current working group changes to a cabinet advisory group, and however its membership is then devised, that group would then lead the policy review. Now, that's my slight concern is would the full council be content with that, because this would be a cabinet advisory group, so it would be advising the cabinet, and it might be seen by some members as being a bit too close to the cabinet for comfort. So I think we're going to have to formulate it quite carefully to ensure that there is not just political balance, but also geographical balance as well. I mean, I suppose you could say that's all to come when the paper is prepared for cabinet, but we've got to get this right first time, I think, because otherwise we don't want to end up with a long argument about who's in the cabinet advisory group and who isn't, and so on, and how. So I just want to make the point that really it is key that preferably within this financial year, but if not, as soon as possible into the next one, that the policy review is conducted and concluded and agreed by council, the outcome of it, so that we can get on and start making decisions that need to be made, as which are constant. To be perfectly frank, things don't stand still. So that was just the point I wanted to make. But I think the working group's done some really good stuff, and obviously dual membership of the group and the scrutiny committee is going to be a bit tricky. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I may come in on that one, Chair.
Please do, Gary. Yeah.
I think obviously can't yet predict, James, what the group decide to do that isn't there yet, but I would almost be encouraging it almost to be a task and finish group, particularly in its first X number of months, be that 4, 5, 6 months, and its sole job might be to help support and develop that policy framework around the farm estate. I'd be very keen to see that happen. I wouldn't say we'd want to leave it all up to the farmer group to do, because obviously it's going to need officer support and all of that sort of stuff, but I think we could host it within there most definitely and make that the absolute priority, and probably in my opinion the only priority going forward until that's resolved. And I think in terms of membership,
if I could just come in there, Gary, that ERC Scrutiny did make a recommendation that Cabinet accepted, that they will review and update their farms policy. So that is a matter for Cabinet to do. I would be suggesting that the working group will be feeding into that, offering their advice. That's the whole point of an advisory group, isn't it? But it is for Cabinet to make that decision, whether they choose to put it to full council or whatever. So yes, I totally agree. It's not the job of the Farms Working Group to write policy. That's Cabinet's job, in my opinion. There was also a motion, wasn't there, before full council that Cabinet do this, and that was voted on as well. So I think that is already sort of set in stone, as it was, that policy needs reviewing, updating, and being clear. So I would suggest that this group has got a great opportunity to feed into that. But as you say, that'll be for the group once it's formed.
Yeah,
so I think we're maybe running ahead of ourselves, because actually we need to have agreement here now from ERC Scrutiny for that to go ahead. But please finish your points first, and then we perhaps have to make a vote.
I think, I'm jumping ahead as I often do, but I think in terms of perhaps alleviating some of your potential fears, James, is I think we absolutely want to make that specific piece of work effectively a full council eyes on it. Whoever wants to join in with it, please do come and join in, because I think that's the way we need to do it. And we might be slightly tied on the formation of the group, but that's fine. But we can work outside of that most definitely, and definitely got my assurances that the group will really do that. And I think in terms of geographical, but also making sure that there's those independent representationals allowed within the group, so that we can hear as many voices as we possibly can. And therefore it's going to be a big piece of work. It's going to take us a while, but definitely jumping the gun. I think probably back to you, Chair, to say, okay, we haven't had any too specific questions on the paper itself, and are we supportive of the move to disband and reformulate? Thank you.
Exactly. So back to ERC Scrutiny then. Does anybody have any questions on the paper that Gary's put before us? It's looking good, Gary. Everybody's quiet. That's always good news. In that case, we have 3 recommendations. Recommendation 1, that the ERC Scrutiny Committee considers the proposal of ERC County Farms Working Group to disband. Are we all in favour of that? Shall we have a show of hands? Yeah. And if anybody isn't in favour, can they make that clear? Okay, I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So that's so for the group to disband. Recommendation 2 is for the council's county farm and woodland estate scrutiny to be undertaken by ERC Scrutiny. So that'll be an extra piece of work for us. I don't think I have got any concerns. I think you're all more than capable. But again, can we have a show of hands? You're happy with that? Yeah. Any objections? Make yourself known. Lovely. No. Full agreement there. And thirdly, for the establishment of a cabinet advisory group to be proposed to cabinet. So that is for ERC Scrutiny to make that proposal to Cabinet that they set up a Cabinet advisory group on the farms. Everybody in favour? Yeah, no objections, nobody. So there we are. Well done, Gary. All your recommendations are passed unanimously. So now you can start the exciting work of deciding what you're going to do, when and how. And we'll leave that to you. Councillor Ardwell, your hand is still up. Did you have any comment you'd like to make?
Well, no, just obviously we'll have the terms and conditions or the reference for the new scrutiny group in due course, I take it, won't before we accept. Will we have that paper to see?
We won't have that,
for the cabinet advisory group. You mean it? Oh well.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's a piece of work for me to do to generate a draft. Obviously, it would have to go through that cabinet proposal first, so it's got to go to cabinet as a recommendation. Arguably, then cabinet would sign off on the terms of reference, but I would certainly think there'd need to be a draft one so that the group themselves can make sure it's doing what it wants to do and you're there for the right reason. But yeah, let's set that as a task from that cabinet decision to get the terms of reference set up, shared with the.
Will there be sort of a condition on? So I know it wants to be politically balanced. So how many members would we be roughly looking for?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question. In the top of my mind, let's say formally maximum of 9. I think that would be arguably too many in terms of a political balance group. But outside of that, if 6 other people want to come and give us their support and advice and information and skills, yes, please. Not going to say to no to anyone. What I don't want to do is tie the group up with having core numbers too high that we never get or things like that. So
no, I
yeah,
appreciate
I'll
that.
take a bit of support.
Yeah, but on the other side of the coin, sort of thing, we don't want sort of 35, 40 members turning up, and it's because otherwise we're not going to get nowhere, are we really?
No.
That was my fear, but obviously no, we'll wait for that terms of reference and we'll go from there. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, and I don't know whether Clive would actually give us an indication of a recommended number or not. I'm not sure we've got any of these formal cabinet advisory groups out there already to sort of reference, but yeah, I'm thinking definitely just below double figures.
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that, Gary. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Liz, you got your hand up? Are you on mute, Liz?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I need to leave the meeting, but I just wanted to clarify, I think I've got this right, that the terms of reference now will come back to us.
Yes, that would. Oh, right. Jake is saying no.
No.
You're on mute, Jake. Sorry.
Yes, I don't think the terms of reference of a cabinet advisory group is for scrutiny to set. It is for cabinet. That is for James and myself actually as portfolio leads for this. So we would liaise with Clive on the terms of reference with that. So whilst the recommendation is to cabinet, in effect, it's within the gift of James and I to pursue this. And I've now clicked the button and sent the email to Clive asking him to start work on this on the basis of a previous email exchange that we had in terms of numbers, etc., etc. So no, it's not for scrutiny to automatically have a look at the terms of that. Scrutiny has asked for a piece of work to be done. We're getting on with that piece of work, and I think we should be just allowed to get on with it. If in the due course you wish to scrutinise anything, it's in your gift to ask to do so.
Thank you, Jake, for that clarity. I think I misheard something probably, but thank you. And I am going to leave, so I wish you all a really good break if I don't see you again before.
Merry Christmas, Liz. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution.
Order downstairs.
Okay. Councillor Adrian, you got your hand up.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I thought my camera was frozen. Well, could I ask Councillor Jake if you and James Gibson-Watt are going to be sort of the leaders in the terms of reference for the advisory group, you must have some sort of indication on the numbers you would like to see involved to get cross-party already. Have you got any insight in that? Because if it's going to be like, say, example, a committee where there's a formula, are you going down those lines? To get cross and then involve names coming from leaders of parties, etc. Have you got any idea what you're thinking?
Yeah, so there is a process in these matters, and we have had advice from Clive in respect of how that would work in terms of the numbers from each of the groups. As with any politically balanced party, it depends on where you're at, and I've got a list of all of those. I think it totals 13 in number within that list. Excluding the non-aligned independents, and James and I have a conversation about whether or not we potentially move one of the Lib Dems seats to bring in one of the non-aligned independents as a vote. There clearly would be a process of conversations to get to that point. But yes, Clive, as you know, as always, has a methodology of calculating these things. We have seen that. We're accepting of that. But as I've indicated earlier, if there is other expertise elsewhere by way of knowledge, geography, as James has indicated, then as non-voting members, then we would like to have that mature input, not to load the thing in one way or the other, but to have a proper reflective group that does a piece of work as has been indicated.
Okay, thank you. So it's looking like it's going to be larger than what Gary was indicating. It's going to be in the teens, probably.
Well, 13 as a group.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
If with those numbers, that's just how it is. And then you know, 1 or 2 invitees or whatever.
Others, yeah. Thank you. That's great.
Okay, lovely. So if nobody's got any questions on that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, item 9, which is our scrutiny work programme. And you can see the little programme set up there. We've got a work programming meeting, that's Rachel, Carl and myself, on the 8th of January, and our next meeting proper is the 19th of January. And just to remind members, if you've got any items that you would like to bring before ERC scrutiny, you can let Carl and myself and Rachel know, and we can try and add them into our busy work programme. But any questions on that? No, silence. There we are. Well, committee.